You walk into an area that was once home to a community of people just living their lives day to day. Now the site sits empty. Congratulations, you're in a ghost town. The United States is filled with abandoned ghost towns and ghost stories. Today we will explore some of these towns and their stories. The stories are the amazing part. The towns themselves, in some cases, have been reclaimed by Mother Nature, and only the stories remain. We're going across the country on this video, from Northern California to ghost towns in Utah, an abandoned town in Missouri, and finally, the Great Smoky Mountains. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Falk, the ghost town that the forest took back. Imagine a typical ghost town. Dusty streets, tumbleweeds are the local decor, and maybe a saloon door creaking in the wind. Yeah, Falk was nothing like that. Tucked away in the middle of Northern California's redwoods, this place wasn't some sun-bleached wasteland. It was damp, overgrown, and seriously creepy. Anyone that wanders in will find crumbling ruins covered in moss, vines snaking over what was left of a wall, and trees straight up growing through the buildings. Nature wasn't just taking Falk back, it was swallowing it whole, one fern at a time. Today, those crumbling structures are long gone, and the site now is part of the Headwaters Forest Reserve, just 6 miles outside of Eureka, California. But Falk's story isn't entirely lost. The story of Falk is just like many other ghost towns in the United States. It was once a town built around an industry. In this case, it was around lumber. There's a very interesting book called Falk's Claim, The Life and Death of a Redwood Lumber Town. I'll leave a link for that in the description area below. I read this like a couple years back. It's an amazing book. Back in 1860, a businessman named Noah Falk set up the River Mill and Logging Company right in the heart of Humboldt County's redwood forest. Thanks to the Timber and Stone Act of 1878, he and his partners could snatch up acres of untouched redwoods for next to nothing. All they needed was a workforce and a place to keep them. This was a weird time in the United States. Industries were booming in remote areas, so companies had to build little pop-up towns to house their workers, and that's exactly what happened with Falk. This town had everything: a school, a general store, a post office, a cookhouse, even a dance hall. At its peak, 400 lumberjacks and their families called Falk home. One tree at a time, they worked through the old-growth redwoods. Falk thrived for decades, but in the 1920s, cars changed everything. Workers no longer had to live in the middle of the forest to be on site. They could just drive in from Eureka. Then came the Great Depression, and the logging industry took a major hit. In 1937, the Falk mill shut down for good. A few stubborn residents stuck around, but most packed up and left. Their abandoned houses sat untouched, still filled with the personal belongings as the town slowly faded into history. Even though the town was gone, they had a caretaker there named Charlie Webb. Charlie Webb had a reputation of chasing off intruders with a shotgun. Everybody knew about Charlie Webb. They say his shotgun was always loaded with rock salt and ready to go. Charlie Webb died in the early 1940s, but it's said that you could still hear him yelling at people to get off the land to this day. By 1979, almost everything had been torn down except for the caretaker's cottage and old railroad roundhouse. Falk, once a bustling town, was now gone. In 1999, the Falk site became part of the Headwater Forest State Reserve and a protected stretch of old-growth redwoods. Slowly but surely, the forest crept back in, swallowing up what little remained of Falk. I watched a YouTube video and these people had gone for a hike up there, and they swore they saw little kids running alone through the woods up there around Falk. And these weren't modern-day kids. I guess none of them had a cell phone or a tablet. Grafton, Utah. Along the Virgin River, not too far from Zion National Park, you find Grafton, Utah, in Utah's so-called Dixie region. And this town got its start thanks to Brigham Young, who figured the area would be a solid spot for growing cotton. In 1859, 5 Latter-day Saint families set up shop in Grafton. They gave cotton farming a shot, but quickly realized food crops were a smarter bet. Just as they got things going, Mother Nature had other plans. In 1862, the Virgin River went rogue and wiped out the whole town. Not ones to give up easily, the settlers rebuilt a mile upstream. Then in 1866, things got even trickier. Conflicts between the Blackhawks and other native groups led Brigham Young to tell folks in smaller towns to pack it up and move somewhere safer. So Grafton was abandoned. Sort of. Farmers still showed up to tend their fields, and by 1868, a few stubborn ones moved back and built an adobe schoolhouse, which shockingly is still standing today. Yeah, it's right there. Adobe structures seem to last forever. As time went on, the younger generation started piecing out for better opportunities. They're like, no, I'm not going to live the life in Grafton. By the 20th century, Grafton had officially joined the Ghost Club town. But this isn't just any forgotten outpost. It's had its Hollywood moments. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It was filmed here. The old Arizona, the first outdoor talkie as they called it back in the day, also filmed here. Today, Grafton is pretty much just 4 buildings and a cemetery, but its stories live on. Every year, descendants from the original settlers meet up to keep the town's memory alive. And if you ever visit, you'll get a hauntingly beautiful glimpse into what life was like in the early settler days, complete with stunning sandstone cliffs and a ridiculously blue sky. Now, this place is not without some ghost stories, though. People that have gone here hear disembodied footsteps in empty buildings. And yes, they've checked. It's not homeless. The other one is people claim that they're looking in the buildings. They feel someone breathe on the back of their neck. Turn around, no one's there. There's also been reports of seeing 2 young girls swinging on a swing that isn't there. Oddly enough, 2 young girls drowned in the new Grafton. There's also been reports of shadowy figures in the windows of the abandoned buildings. And of course, the ever-present rumors of skinwalkers in the area. All in all, there's whole books on haunted Grafton that are pretty freaky. I read a couple of stories. Yeah, it wasn't comfortable, especially the one about the little girls who drowned in the river. They're still playing, thinking everything's fine. Kane, Wyoming, the town that vanished, but the ghosts remain. Kane, Wyoming is a town that went for a swim. This tiny town is long gone, completely wiped off the map. But for the descendants of those buried in the Kane cemetery, the stories of their past still are very much alive. Kane was a little town that sat about 2 miles south of where the Shoshone River and Bighorn River meet in Bighorn County, northern Wyoming. But unless you're a scuba diver, the history will be lost on you because you gotta dive in the water if you want to see it. Kane got its start as a lumber and shipping hub. Pretty standard, right? Typical industry built around a town. But the real action started in 1832 when Captain B.L.E. Bonneville, a guy whose name sounds way too fancy for the rugged out west, but he decided to roll through with his wagon train. Now, unlike a lot of the people back in the day, he didn't just settle on raising one type of livestock. He showed up with a bizarre mix of 4 mules, 4 horses, 4 oxen. Guess he was trying to hedge his bets on which species was going to work. But Bonneville thought this was a great place to start a trading post, so he set up near present-day Cody. The local Native American tribes made it very clear that they were not interested in Bonneville's franchise opening in their neighborhood. So he packed up and left, and ended Kane's brief brush with pre-settlement commerce. So most of the people left out of Kane, but a few hardy folks remained. And it remained that way over the years. Winters came, winters left, the harsh environment continued. It never regained any semblance of anything but a small town on the prairie. Fast forward to the 1960s, when the US government decided it would be a great idea to build the Yellowtail Dam in Montana. This was fine for energy production and water control, but not fine for the remaining residents of Kane, who suddenly found themselves living in a future lakefront property, except it was underwater. So they did what any rational person would do. They sold their homes to the federal government, packed up their stuff, and left before the whole area was drowned by the rising waters of Bighorn Lake. Now, one thing that isn't underwater is the Kane Cemetery. It still sits about a mile north of where the river meets, inside what's now the Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area. And when it comes to history, the government was actually being reasonable. People with relatives buried there can still be buried there today. Now, this one has a pretty spooky story. It's the Blue Lady. Matilda Waters' story is carved out into the silence of the Kane Cemetery. In 1921, after losing her youngest child, something inside of her kind of snapped. One cold evening, while her husband and his eldest daughter dined with neighbors, Matilda stayed home. She bathed her children, gave them popcorn, tucked them in, and then reached for a gun. She first climbed the stairs and took the life of her 2 daughters that were asleep. She went back down the stairs and did the same to her 2 sons. One of them survived, Jim. Some claim he survived the shooting, others claimed he heard the first shots and hid. Jim Waters Sr. returned home to echoes of gunfire. He ran to the house, but the screen door was locked. When Matilda appeared, she was covered in blood. She had also turned the gun on herself, but wasn't dead yet. These days, people still see Matilda, and she's known as the Blue Lady now, a spectral glowing figure among the graves. moving like something searching for something lost. One woman swore she saw the blue lady drift across the road late one night, vanishing into the trees. Others claim the glow appears miles away near Crystal Creek. Some say she's looking for her children. St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo wasn't always St. Elmo. Originally it went by Forest City, but big surprise, there were already a ton of places named Forest City. Apparently originality wasn't their strong suit back then, so they changed it to St. Elmo. I didn't know they were giving Muffet sainthood, but here we have it. But the real story is this. One of the town's founding fathers, Griffin Evans, decided to spice up and name it after a novel he was reading. Imagine if he'd been reading Moby Dick at the time. We'd have a ghost town named Ahab. Or Ishmael. Now, back in the 1890s, St. Elmo was a place to be. It had everything. A telegraph office, talking high-tech back then, a general store, town hall, 5 hotels, saloons, dance halls, and a newspaper. They even built a schoolhouse for the rare kids that didn't have to work in the mines. Speaking of which, mining was the town's bread and butter. St. Elmo Mountaineer newspaper kept everyone up to date on the local gold-digging drama from 1880 to 1895. Mining-wise, the Mary Murphy mine was a big deal here. It pulled out about $60 million in gold back in the day, which when adjusted for inflation is enough to make you rethink your life choices. While the mines shut down left and right, Mary Murphy chugged along till 1922, when the railroad decided they had had enough of the town. And that, folks, is when St. Elmo started its ghost town era. You know, when they're not pulling gold out of the ground, and there's not many jobs, people don't stick around. Imagine that. Now it's one of those eerie, cool ghost towns people visit for the old-timey charm, because nothing says fun like wandering through the remnants of an old town that once had 5 hotels and now 0 people. But they do have a ghost. That'd be Annabelle Dirty Annie Stark. Yes, they actually gave this woman a nickname, Dirty Annie. And let me tell you, she was a character. Annabelle came from a long line of Starks, not the Game of Thrones, who rolled into town in 1881 on the Pacific Railroad. Her dad, Anton, worked in the mines as a section boss, while her mom ran a hotel on Popular Street. Now, Mama Stark wasn't exactly winning any parenting awards. She kept her 3 kids, Roy, Tony, and Annabelle, on lockdown. No socializing, no mixing with the common folk. Just pure old-fashioned isolation. But Annabelle, she had a thing for St. Elmo. She loved the town, even if she wasn't allowed to interact with it. Fast forward, Mama Stark kicks the bucket, and Annabelle and her brother Tony take over the hotel. And well, let's just say they weren't exactly hospitality experts. The place fell apart faster than my New Year's resolutions. As the town slowly faded into history, so did Annabelle's grip on reality. People started calling her Dirty Annie because she wandered around in raggedy clothes with her hair that looked like she had lost a fight with a tumbleweed. Here's the real kicker. She'd patrol Main Street with a shotgun slung over her shoulder, ready to defend whatever was left of her beloved town. And apparently, she still does. People swear they see her ghost roaming around, keeping an eye on things. So if you ever visit St. Elmo and feel like you're being watched, it might be Dirty Annie, still on guard. Melva, Missouri. Nestled in the Ozarks of southern Missouri, Melva was once a modest town in Taney County. Situated along the Missouri Pacific Railroad, it was established before 1900. It had about 100 residents and served as a small but bustling community. The town was very promising for the locals, it had work, it was growing, and they had hope. However, on March 11, 1920, the town had its eye on Turkey Creek, which had swelled to near flood levels. That afternoon, a devastating tornado struck Melva, claiming the lives of 11 residents, including 9 children, and caused extensive property damage. The children weren't all together either, at school or something like that. Homes were destroyed and the families were thrown into the air. One woman woke up in the creek clutching a log, not knowing what had become of her children. They didn't survive the destruction of the home. Now, the kids would have been together on that morning, but the school teacher couldn't cross the swollen Turkey Creek to get to school. If the kids did have school that day, the result could have been much worse, as the schoolhouse was perched on a hill overlooking the town. It was torn to pieces. Melva was erased from the map that day. The destruction was so severe that the town was never rebuilt, leading to its abandonment and the eventual status as a ghost town. That tornado was so strong they really don't know what category it was back then, but it had blown parts of the town miles away. tax paperwork from a resident named J.P. Gross were discovered in the woods, having traveled nearly 70 miles. Now, what made a bad situation even worse is the swollen creek. This carried debris and bodies downriver, so it took them quite a while to recover everyone. People that may have been alive during the tornado, maybe they were thrown in and drowned because they couldn't escape this creek. Today, remnants of Melva can be found between Hollister and the Arkansas border. Visitors exploring the area can discover ruins of the old post office, foundations of houses, and traces from the roads, offering a glimpse into the town's past. People that have gone to Melva say they can hear voices whispering in the woods around what used to be the town. If you walk around in the woods around Melva, you could find headstones or grave markers with local residents' names on them. Elkmont, Tennessee. Elkmont went from a buzzing boomtown to a creepy abandoned ghost town in no time. So let's talk about Elkmont, aka the place that went from Lumberjack Central to rich people weekend getaway to abandoned ghost towns, all in the span of about a century. The early days was all about logs, trains, and a whole lot of trees. Way back in 1840, people started settling in what was then called Little River. But things got interesting around 1901 when Colonel Wilson B. Townsend waltzed in, bought up about 86,000 acres, and started cutting down trees. This man chopped down everything in sight. He set up the Little River Lumber Company and built a railroad to haul logs to Tuckaleechee Cove. Here's where it gets fun. This wasn't just a train for lumber. Before long, rich folks from Knoxville started using it for weekend trips into the mountains. Turns out, they liked Elkmont so much that they pulled the ultimate rich person move. They just bought up chunks of it and turned it into their own private vacation spot. Because, why not? Everything was going great until 1934 when the government rolled in with a little something called the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Residents had two choices: sell your land for full price and leave immediately, or sell it for less but stay there until you die. Almost like a reverse mortgage type of situation. You were allowed to live there, they didn't chase you off, but nobody could buy your house. The government owned it. They were essentially letting you stay there after purchase. Most folks picked number 2, which meant Elkmont had a slow fade into ghost town status. By 1992, the last of those leases ran out, and suddenly about 70 buildings were just sitting there, empty. No maintenance, no upkeep, just slow, inevitable collapse. Fast forward a few decades, and what was once a bustling resort town is now a spooky collection of crumbling buildings just waiting for someone to come along and say, hey, this place is kind of creepy. Let's take a look. Now, not everything was left to rot. The National Park Service stepped in and saved about 19 historic buildings and let the rest meet their doom around 2018. These restored structures now give visitors a peek into what Elkmont used to be. One of the coolest places still standing? Levi Trenton's cabin, one of the oldest buildings in the Smokies. They actually moved it from Jake's Creek and fully restored it in 2017. As of 2023, 16 of those preserved buildings are open to the public, so you could literally step inside history. Now, if you're more of one of those people that likes to just walk around and discover history instead of, having well-manicured lawns around old buildings, check out Jake Creek and Little River trails, where you'll find some old stone walls and chimneys and basically all of that left from former cabins. While you're there, make sure you check out the Troll Bridge. It's a cute little stone bridge in the woods that looks straight out of a fairy tale or horror movie, depending on how you feel about it, how you feel about abandoned places, and I imagine the weather, because if it's a nice sunny day, it might not be that spooky, but go there on a nice cloudy, overcast day with a little fog on the ground, might seem a little spooky. Now, there's supposedly a lot of paranormal activity going on around here. A lot of these paranormal YouTube channels have gone to Elkmont to do videos. People say that they see people looking at them from the woods, they hear footsteps in the abandoned buildings, and they see people in the creek late at night. When they get closer, they're not there anymore. One person said they visited there at night, and they said a young boy was seen on the trail crawling towards them. They said he was like 12. It wasn't a baby crawling. He was, almost a teenager. He crawled towards them. As he got closer, he just kind of faded away. And then they heard some rustling in the bushes nearby right after that. Alright, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, you might like one of the 2 videos being suggested right now. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.